So much to talk about. Let's just begin with what the correct approach is from the Europeans on this. There are different views about going hard, going soft. What do you think is the right sequence here in the conversations with the United States?
Well, I think that the message that EU leaders must send is a message of trust, of confidence in very turbulent days where everything is around uncertainty and more tariffs, negative messages to citizens and firms. We need to keep on a positive message to our citizens, telling them that we will help them, that we will support them in these under these days of tariff or trade conflict. And Spain has reacted very quickly. We did put in place a safety net for citizens and firms of 14.1 billion. Barely 12 hours after the announcement by the Trump administration, we think that there needs to be also an EU leg to this support. Citizens and firms at the EU level need to understand that the EU will protect them. And then, of course, going ahead, we need to also send a message of confidence to trading partners, including the US. We're open to negotiations, we're open to trade, but we will not be naive.
And so in order to not be naive, you need to have a sort of credible threat to reciprocate, or whatever the word is, we're going to call it, to the United States. Now, what is that? Where do you see as the point of leverages? What are you prepared to discuss today in order to respond to the United States?
Well, there'll be discussions first on the tariffs that were already in place a few weeks ago on aluminium and steel. And there is already, as you know, a preliminary list of products that can be also taxed with duties, with import duties by the EU. We will be discussing that specific list, but we will also be discussing the second step, the potential reaction also to what was announced 2 weeks ago on cars, the tariffs on cars, but also what was announced last week with these so-called reciprocal tariffs.
And so what are the correct responses to that? Because, of course, there's a limited amount that the European Union can do on goods. That is part of the reason that Donald Trump has imposed these tariffs. There's a $200 or so billion trade deficit in favor of the Europeans. Are you looking at targeting potentially U.S. tech companies, services taxes? What are you thinking?
Well, again, I think we have to somehow avoid taking out of the table any instrument. We have the proper tools, the necessary tools to respond. So none of them should be discarded at this point, but we need to keep on sending a message of being open to negotiating with the US, but we need them also to be able to negotiate. We need two to tango.
And Macron has said basically he's discouraged European businesses from investing in the United States. Is that a sentiment that you echo?
Well, I think that's we don't even need to do that, because I think business people and firms will be discouraged by all this uncertainty at this point. The investment decisions, they're medium or long-term decisions, so they need to understand that we need to lower this uncertainty and give a message of trust. And from the EU, that's what we're doing. We're sending a positive message of stability, of trustworthiness, and that's what we expect, that will actually increase investment in the EU as well.
And I'm sure you, just like me, have been listening to a lot of Donald Trump over the last few days, Howard Lutnick, Scott Bessent. Does this sound like a U.S. administration that is dying to do a deal? Because it doesn't to me.
Well, we have to remain a bit cool-headed, if I may say, very practical and engage with our peers.
When we think about the goals that they're trying to achieve, which they've said very explicitly is reshoring of industry and these sorts of things, does this give you a sense that they seem to be wanting to let their allies sweat a little bit? Well,
you know, we've been in this quest for strategic autonomy, all of us, for the past few years. And from the EU side, we understand that there is also an open side to this strategic autonomy quest. And that's how we want to go forward. I think it's compatible to keep ourselves open to trade and even to reinforce our relationship with the US. It's a very strong one. 4.4 billion euros actually are going across the Atlantic on a daily basis in terms of goods in trades and of trading goods and services. We need to reinforce that. But having said that, of course, we need to be able to respond to whatever threats would be on the side of the US or any other country.
And what concessions are you thinking about potentially presenting to the Trump administration? Would you be lowering tariffs? What other sort of vehicles, because he's very obsessed with the non-tariff barriers. Do you have a clear idea of what those things are that you'd like to see changed?
Well, again, we will be engaged in those conversations on an honest basis, trying to understand what their concerns are, specifically, as you said, on non-tariff barriers. And then, from then on, what we want to do is to actually achieve a fair and balanced deal. And so from that point of view, the EU will engage constructively.
And I'd like to also get, because you obviously also manage the Spanish economy, you've also, there's been an advocacy of basically establishing an EU fund that would basically be funded by the tariffs collected from the United States in order to support Spanish industry, or European industry, but Spanish industry. What industries should that money go to? What are you looking at? Where do you see the pressure points arriving in Spain?
Well, I think it's, first, the EU dimension is key when we discuss actually how to respond to this. We need a new umbrella to protect our most affected sectors or industries. And actually, why? Because first, the EU has competence in terms of trade. The EU will get the revenues if there are import tariffs as well. And then I think citizens, as I said, and firms need to understand that the EU will protect them. We need unity in the response. So then again, we will have to see what sectors will be finally most affected. And those funds will need to be redirected to them.
Which do you anticipate right now, just as watching the Spanish economy, you think will be most effective?
Well, looking at EU overall, we know that the automotive sector will be one of them. Let's see what happens finally with pharmaceuticals. We know that something is coming. We don't know exactly when and how much will be in terms of tariffs for that specific sector, but it's important for Spain and other EU countries. And we need to go one by one looking at sectors, but also there will be firms that might not appear at the sectoral level being affected, but that will be particularly affected as well. So we need to go very micro and look at the actual impact.
And there's another side to this story, because as the United States erects trade barriers with the entire world, there's only really one market that can absorb that kind of capacity. That is the EU. How do you defend the EU market about all of this coming from China and the rest of the world, all of these products coming into Europe?
Of course, we're looking at trade diversion as well in order for us to be able to protect ourselves from this impact. And I think two elements here. One, we've done it already in terms of the steel market. We actually updated our safeguard clause to be able to protect and have our firms also act on a level playing field. But we will also have to engage with other strategic partners. And on that, going ahead with the Mercosur ratification, I think will be key also for some of these potentially affected sectors to gain new markets. For example, agriculture, the agricultural sector, and particularly the wine or the olive oil sector, which for Spain are also key.
And I'd like to just get your idea of how this changes the relationship and the conversation around China, the trade relationship. Your Prime Minister is heading to China very soon, and to Vietnam, two nations that notably were hit with the hardest levels of tariff. How does that change the relationship between the EU and China? Does this make China a more reliable partner? Does this increase the threat of Chinese goods to the European Union? How do you view that?
Well, we've been working on strengthening our relationship with one of our strategic partners, which is China, for the past few years already, with a strong diplomatic effort from the Spanish side. Actually, the Spanish president has been there for a few times. He's going there again this week, again, to strengthen those ties, to find new markets for EU products, and also to be able to attract Chinese investment, which will be another key element for our strategic autonomy going forward. And so,
but I just want to return to kind of the primary point here. Do you think that it is important to basically display the strength of the European Union in these discussions with Donald Trump? Because again, there's this sense that, yes, we can support industry to a certain degree, but this is a $1 trillion relationship that has been turned on its head. I'd like to get a clearer sense of kind of what measures outside of the sort of ordinary trade tools, tariffs, you're thinking about applying.
Well, the EU, again, I think we need to find the right balance in our response at this point. We need, again, to be cool-headed. But first is a message of course, lines are open. We want to negotiate. But in case we're not able to actually reach that point, we are ready to enter into using our instruments, which go, as you know, from the tariffs to a wider set of instruments that could also reach other elements, not only goods.